Hello, welcome guys to part 2 of American imperialism. We are going to talk about the Spanish-American War today. The Spanish-American War is like the first real action that the United States gets in terms of our goal to colonize. So this is a big deal for the United States. It's called sometimes the Splendid Little War because it's so short and yet so great for us. So one thing again I want to remind you is that I have a note-taking guide on Classroom that I made for you all that you can print off if you have the ability to. That is for this entire PowerPoint. If you don't have the ability to print it off, you can always kind of use it as a guide in making your own notes on your own pieces of paper. Or you can just take your own notes, whatever you feel comfortable doing. All right, so let's move forward. All right, so some background. The Spanish-American War is going to be affecting Cuba, okay? Sorry, I don't know how to make this little box go away. Oh, maybe. Okay, we'll try that. And so Cuba at the time, we have definitely been semi-involved in, if you remember from the Civil War, like the Austin Manifesto, there were talks about the United States expanding into Cuba, but we're pretty much squashed because of the issue of slavery. But in the 1890s, there were some restrictions on sugar imports to the United States that really hurt the economy of Cuba, which at that time was still a Spanish colony. And so some of these economic ties started to lead to political conflict between the Cubans and their Spanish rulers. And so you have these nationalists, meaning people within Cuba who want Cuba to be an independent nation. That's what a nationalist is, somebody who wants that nation to be independent. Began this revolt against the Spanish colonial regime. So again, within the mid-1890s, we start to see the Cubans have their own revolution. They're trying to become independent from Spain. So here is a list of the causes of the Spanish-American War. We're going to go through each one individually, but if you want to write them down so that you have okay, here's my 5 main causes, that's helpful. So number 1 is the Cuban Revolution. That's kind of what I was just talking about. Again, we're going to talk about these more. Number 2, proximity of Cuba to the United States. Think about how close it is. It's a little over 100 miles away, and so that's going to definitely impact us, whatever happens there. Number 3, yellow journalism. We'll talk about what that is. The Lome letter and the sinking of the battleship, the USS Maine. So those are going to be our 5 main reasons. So first of all, let's just take a look at some pictures here that are showing the United States and its relationship with Cuba. I like this one because you have Uncle Sam here, of course, with the flag, and he's putting it around the Cuban woman who is kind of looking like this damsel in distress, and it says, "Save me from my friends." She is this person who's an independent, in favor of an independent Cuba, and you have these insurgents over here who are, the bad guys. And so you can see how the United States is kind of serving as this protector. You can also see that the United States is very close to Cuba, and therefore it is kind of our business because of the proximity. This one is from Puck magazine. This cartoon, of course, there's some annotations here, but you can see Cuba literally burning, and it says anarchy on it, and the Cuban here in the frying pan of Spanish misrule. So within the United States, there's a lot of criticism of Spain and of the Cubans who are causing problems there, and we want to help these innocent Cubans, and that's kind of what is portrayed in the media. All right, so Cuban Revolution and U.S. proximity. So I'm going to talk about number 1 and number 2 together. So remember, in the 1890s, we have this Cuban rebellion happening, and the Spanish decide to send in this general to kind of crush the rebellion. So his name is General Weyler, but he gets the nickname Butcher. which you can see that's probably not good. The Cuban rebels are then placed in concentration camps, and many die there due to poor sanitation. That's not an extermination camp. They're not killing them directly, but they are, being put in these camps where sanitation is bad. They're not getting great food or healthcare. And so, by 1898, a third of Cubans were in these camps, and more than 4,000 had died from lack of medicine, poor nutrition, and unsanitary conditions. Of course, the United States, is getting word of this and is getting, ads like this, cartoons like this in their newspapers. And so there's a lot of sympathy for Cuba. The heck with Spain, right? Like, we don't care about them. Cuba is the underdog, and Cuba has these innocent people. And, some other things here. The Americans were absolutely trading with Cuba and didn't really have economic ties so much with Spain. Cuba was acting kind of independently there. And Spain was like this dying empire in the United States. Like, we'd mostly taken over all their stuff within North America, and Spain, can you just go away? Also, Cuba was an important place for potentially building a canal in Panama, which had been an idea that the United States had wanted to pursue, but hadn't been able to yet. So here's another cartoon from Judge Magazine where you can see it's a little, some of these words are hard to see, but generally we can see the Cuban here tied up in the confines of Spain's 16th century methods, meaning very cruel and unusual punishment. Think like being tortured within Spain's Spanish Inquisition or something. And then you have, liberty reaching out, trying to get the Cuban. So again, the United States is kind of seen as the savior to the poor Cubans who are being treated so badly by the Spanish. Okay, reason number 3, yellow journalism. And the best thing I think I can kind of connect this to in the modern day is fake news. Yellow journalism is essentially news that is sensationalized and very crudely exaggerated. So they would have headlines that would be kind of untrue or not fact-checked, but would be really sensational, where people would want to buy the paper. Our two main problem makers here are William Hearst and Pulitzer. So these are two prominent newspaper journalists. Of course, you might have heard of like the Pulitzer Prize, and Hearst is still a big family name in journalism. But these were two rival journalists who were publishing frequently about what was going on in Cuba. Here you can see in this picture, they're wearing the yellow journalism, and this one's Pulitzer, this one is Hearst. They're kind of portrayed as children playing with little building blocks, and in the process they are building up war. They're spelling war out. So what that cartoon is kind of saying is that this yellow journalism was having a really big impact on actual politics. Them printing all this stuff that was super sensational and super like aggressive against Spain was for sure like leading to feelings of war and sentiments of war in the United States. This is another one showing you yellow journalism. So over here you have the people who are kind of paying into the newspapers, like businessman, gullible reformer, decent citizen. They're buying into the newspapers, and the newspapers are kind of portrayed as this like demonic figure printing sensationalism, venom, attacks on honest officials, self-advertisement, appeals to passion, and then the people just reading it up and eating it up. And so this cartoon is portraying yellow journalism as a very bad thing that's making people act a certain way, making people more paranoid, making people more fearful of Spain and of Cuba. And I think you can definitely connect that to fake news today. Fake news often has at least a grain of truth to it, but it's exaggerated and it makes people afraid and panicked in a lot of ways.